So welcome, everyone. It's lovely to gather again to go deeper into our practice of Tonglen and explore each week a little more thoroughly. So this week, I'm going to focus on the importance of understanding emptiness with our Tonglen practice, or mixing our practice with emptiness. And it begins with our sense of how do we make Tonglen our natural habit. So whenever life arises with a challenge, with a surprise, with a shock, how can we be so thoroughly practiced with Tonglen that arises as our habit? And in order to do so, understanding emptiness is a tremendous support. In Buddhism, we begin to understand that things aren't exactly the way they seem to be. And we use emptiness to undermine our ignorance that we so cling to. So if we were to just honestly admit, what is it like day to day as we're moving along, just living our lives? And I think a lot of people, and I would have to agree, it's as though we have an ongoing movie in which we're the star, right? So essentially we are in our contained world, everybody else is a supporting character, and we accept that we are this great player in this reality, with everybody else slightly less important. So emptiness is our way of just wearing away that constant self-absorption in a very natural manner. And we start to see very clearly in this moment, and I'm just finding it so tremendously helpful, this shelter in place with the coronavirus, to see, I may think I'm, the star of this movie, but I couldn't keep the movie going unless there was a tremendous amount of support. So as we worked with our Tonglen practice this morning, we're going to start with all the supporting players and really see how deeply interconnected we are with them. And start to see also that as long as we maintain the sense of, I am on my side, there is a self that is separate from all of the rest of the world, and that I have to in some way protect that self. As long as that is our view, there will always be fear arising, there will always be shock arising, there will always be discomfort in our experience of life. And we want to wear away those barriers so that we can relax in a vast habit of bodhicitta, or a vast habit of this Tonglen relationship with the whole world. And for those who may be just joining us for the first time, Tonglen is the wonderful practice in which we breathe in first discomfort, then a relationship that is close to us that is experiencing suffering, and then we expand it. So it's a way of welcoming all of life, welcoming the experience that we see in front of us all of the time. So the goal of today is simply to make ourselves more curious. How do we, just for a moment, turn off the movie projector, turn off the lights, and see the reality of our interconnection, the reality of our sameness with every single being that we encounter? It's really not different from the golden rule. How do we get to the point where we understand our sameness to the degree that we begin to treat others the same way we would want ourselves to be treated? So we'll begin with a very short Tonglen practice, just to remind ourselves that we in fact do have quite well-built barriers protecting the self. And we can see these this morning with a kind of sense of humor. So let's begin with the 4 steps of Tonglen. First, we flash on the absolute. We just relax and flash on our own basic goodness, our own Buddha nature, our peaceful mind, reminding ourselves that it is accessible. And just to the degree that you're able to do that, relax with that. It's something that will grow. The second step is breathing in something that's slightly uncomfortable. It can be as though the air was smoky. It can be as though there was a unpleasant smell in the air. If the air was oily or heavily thick with water. So anything that just makes you slightly uncomfortable, welcoming it in and breathing out what is refreshing, what is light, what you like your experience to be. So with this first breath, we just see, oh my goodness, I do have an instinct to protect my comfort. And then the third step is take a situation that's very dear to your heart in which you would naturally think without any hesitation, if I could take this on for you, honey, I would. If I could lift this, I would, and I will breathe it in and I will send you my good health. I will send you my, comfortable house. I will send you a coffee. So it's not about solving a problem or a situation. It's about being able to welcome and take on the suffering of your dear one and send them a little bit of that self-protected comfort. And then the fourth stage is to expand that, to see just like the person who's dear to me, there are many people in this situation. Can I have that natural opening to take on a larger part of the suffering of the world and breathe out the comfort that I have? So I'll ring the bell 4 times with a short reminder, and we'll just do a very brief practice so we can see our minds. And I just want to say, if for those folks, if you could mute yourself so that we don't have a lot of other sounds in the room with us. Okay, so the first bell is flashing on the absolute, your own basic goodness, the spaciousness of your mind, the relaxed quality of your mind to whatever degree you can see that. Now just slightly uncomfortable if the air were smoky, unpleasant smell, oily, denser. And breathing out fresh air. A third step, a situation close to your heart, child, grandchild, family member, animal companion, dear friend. Just for a moment, breathing in what is difficult for them, saying, if I could only do it for a second, I would take it from you. And breathing out, comfort, health, well-being. And then expanding that, can you include with the same authentic sincerity the aspiration to breathe in the suffering of one more or many more beings who are in the same situation as your dear one, and offer to them your comfort, your well-being. So we've affirmed many times that the purpose of meditation is really to see how our mind works. And this meditation shows us that, yes, we have the altruistic motivation to benefit all sentient beings, but even when we're working with one of our dear ones, fear can arise when we think about letting down the boundary, when we think about, could I actually take on their pain, and could I give my resources, my health, my well-being to them? And if we look at the stages of Tonglen, we see how interesting it is. So first we flash on the absolute, and that is a flashing on emptiness itself as a support, that because there is emptiness, there is limitless potential. Things are impermanent and continuously changing in a field of emptiness. So it is a help and support for our altruistic motivation. Then as we progress with that, we see how protecting we are of our own comfort with what is just slightly uncomfortable, how quickly, like steel doors slamming, the barriers can come up. And then we start to see when we give rise to a situation that's close to our hearts, how we have this layered, incredibly complex understanding of our relationship to all of the different kinds of beings in our life in terms of to whom are we related, to whom are we close, and who is more distant, and therefore less important in our uh, expansion of compassion. So this moment of the virus is making it really crystal clear, and it just really makes me laugh. So I can say, that right now I'm living in Maine, even though I'm not a Mainer. I'm living in Falmouth, and there's a sense in the state of wanting a barrier to be up. They're putting all these signs on the highway saying stay home, and people on the main islands are trying to get the ferries to stop because their Maine is different from my Maine. And I like to think that I'm separate from that, but I have to say I have this fairly less well-known city park that I've been going to take walks because it's spacious enough for social distancing. And a lot of my comfort is going on this walk once a day. And when I came to the park and all of a sudden saw a New York license plate, I thought, well, how did that New Yorker find my hidden Maine park? It did flash through my mind. And then yesterday I was taking a walk and I met a neighbor that I don't see very often. And she was saying, but she's been coming to this park for 25 years and she knows everybody on that road. So I thought from her view, this is her Maine park and I'm the interloper in this Maine park. So this has only been a few weeks that I've been going to this park. So already I have it under the me and mine. And I have, well, these people I've seen most days on my walk. So they're within the okay group to be in this park. And then all of a sudden, with the park's opening, there are lots more people. So this is just a few weeks, me and mine arising in relationship to where I take a walk in a public place. Not to mention how we feel about all the different kinds of people in our lives who are allowing us to have safety, health, and well-being. So when we go to the grocery store, Falmouth is a moderately large town, so I know the people by sight, but I haven't inquired too deeply as to how they're doing with their families, et cetera, et cetera. So when I get to the point of, in the Tonglen meditation, of a close friend, a close dear one, that I'm at ease with my natural aspiration arising, can I take on their suffering? It opens a door to these very complex classifications that we do automatically without thinking about it. So our bodhisattva aspirations is to include all sentient beings. So we have the drama of the enemy, yes, we can work with that, but there's an army of people that we have no overt connection to that are really on the outside of our relatedness. So those are the people that I'm going to invite you to be working with today as we look at how does emptiness help us see the sameness between ourselves and this whole army of beings that are literally at our door taking care of us in this moment. So first we see that when we start to just consider the sameness, it undermines the self-absorption that we have, that this is the me and mine. And then when we start to really work even more deeply with the factors of emptiness, we see that in emptiness, there is a sameness, so there is a relatedness. So there's something that unites us. In the same way that last week, the principle of Buddha nature united us in terms of all beings having the same perfection and potential, all beings also have the same nature of emptiness. So emptiness really becomes our friend in terms of supporting the development of our compassion, and it allows us to have the larger goal of ultimate bodhicitta, ultimate loving kindness, ultimate compassion, in which the boundaries have disappeared. The dualism has disappeared between self and others. So at that point, there's no self, no others, no gift, and no recipient. So in Buddhism, we have a wonderful practice of prostrations. And I find this practice one helpful for many reasons, but one of the reasons that it's helpful is in one of the traditional teachings of this practice. You put your enemy in front of you, your family to your right and your left, and all sentient beings behind you. And as you're prostrating, everybody is prostrating with you. But if you consider the view of the Buddha, from the perspective of the Buddha, there is a sameness in this whole field. Your enemy is no different from the Buddhist perspective, no different from you, no different from your family, no different from all the sentient beings of, humans, animals, etc. So there's a sense of the perfection of bodhicitta, the perfection of loving kindness, having the equanimity of the understanding of this sameness, all sentient beings, equal capacity to realize Buddhahood, and equal in their nature of being empty, of a permanent self. So we're going to look at that through some verses of Shantideva, and we're going to look at it using something called analytic meditation. And in analytic meditation, you take one teaching, one verse, one sentence, and you contemplate that verse or sentence, saying to yourself, is this true or not? Can I accept this? Is this something I understand? Do I need to learn more about it? Is it actually true? Is it something beneficial to study? So I'm going to give verse 90 from the chapter on meditation, and it's a series of verses that I've collected, a few critical ones. But I want you to consider them in terms of analytic meditation, and I think it's helpful today to consider them in terms of, when we're thinking of others, the store clerks, the UPS delivery people, the Amazon delivery people, the mail people, the trash collectors, fairly people you're dependent on that you don't know personally. Okay. Strive at first to meditate on the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus be a guardian of all as yourself. So we'll take the one sentence, upon the sameness of yourself and others, in joy and sorrow, all are equal. So being clearly focused on one person. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Are we the same or different from that one person? In joy and sorrow, all are equal. In the next few verses, he develops this theme in more and more subtle ways. So, verse 91, the hands and limbs are many and distinct, but all are one body to be kept and guarded. Likewise, different beings in their joys and sorrows are like me, all one in wanting happiness. I'm going to give you another translation. These verses are so important, it's helpful to look at several different versions. Just as the body, which has many parts, owing to its division into arms and so forth, should be protected as a whole, so should this entire world, which is differentiated and yet has the same nature of suffering and happiness. So we can think of it personally. Our body is divided up. Our hand is different than our arms. Our foot and our toes are different than our fingers. But we don't say our fingers are more important to be protected than our toes, right? Or if we think in terms of whatever family group we think of as dear and close, families have many parts. You might think of a large number of relatives, but relative to the vast group of people who are helping you in this moment, we have a sense of closeness to our family of having many different parts. Why do we stop the parts with our cousin or our sister or our nephew in terms of how we decide these are the close ones that I'll really help and protect, and these are the not close ones? And how does that get to our 10th cousin and then our neighborhood and the whole world? So let's look at this verse and think about how artificial it is, these boundaries that we set. The hands and limbs are many and distinct, but all are one body or one family to be kept and guarded. Likewise, different beings in their joys and sorrows are like me, all one, wanting happiness. Just as the body, which has many parts owing to its division into arms, should be protected as a whole, why not the entire world, which is differentiated and yet has the same nature, suffering and happiness? And going deeper, verse 92. My pain does not in fact afflict or cause discomfort to another's body. Through clinging to my I, this suffering is mine, and being mine is hard to bear. So suffering is the same. Your suffering is the same as my suffering, but it's only experienced by my body, the I that I've created and cling to. And that's why it's so hard for me and so special, so needing of attention, because it's happening in this body, my body, which I have separated from all others. And I'll just repeat this. My pain does not afflict or cause discomfort to you, to another's body. Through clinging to my I, that's why it's harder for me to bear. And being mine, very hard to bear. It's special because it's happening to me. All right, we can understand why our suffering is hard to bear. And then he follows with, and other beings' pain I don't feel. And yet, because I take them for my own, their suffering likewise is hard to bear. So we see this complex net of relatedness. As soon as we take someone for our own, then their suffering becomes hard for us to bear. So it's dependent on how far we can extend that sense of sameness, that sense of relatedness, that another's suffering becomes immediate and hard for us to bear. So think of the neutral person you've been working with, the person you don't know. What if all of a sudden that person became a relative in your mind? They married into your family. All of a sudden, there is what we would call a personal connection, and their joys and sorrows are all of a sudden important in a way they weren't a moment ago. We see this in adoption. We see this in when we find our animal companions. As soon as we extend the sense of relatedness, there's a whole different sensibility. So just let's think about that a minute and contemplate it. And other beings' pain I do not feel. And yet, because I take them for my own, or when I take them for my own, their suffering is likewise hard to bear. And therefore I'll dispel the pain of others, for it is simply pain just like my own. And others I will aid and benefit, for they are living beings just like I am a living being. So we reinforce our altruistic aspiration based on seeing the sameness, that it's us who decides the connection, and it's entirely arbitrary. So the more we're able to see the sameness, the more we're able to establish that connection. I'm going to jump to one of my favorite verses. And in Shantideva, he often has a dialogue with his inner self, his more curmudgeonly self. So he goes, but it's for the sufferer himself, you'll say, to shield himself from injuries that come. So think of the political discussions. It's the others, they have to solve their problems. It's their duty to shield themselves. It's not my duty to shield others from pain. And then the second verse, the pain that's felt in my foot is not my hands. So why in fact does one protect the other? We protect or want to protect our sister, our child, our neighbor, our Sangha member. It's not the same as me, but instinctively we can give rise to that natural feeling. If I could, I would take it from you. I love you so dearly. Okay, I'm going to repeat this verse and we'll sit with it a minute. It's for the sufferer himself, you'll say, to shield himself from injuries that come. The pain felt in my foot is not my hands. So why, in fact, does one protect the other? Okay, I'm going to jump ahead a couple of verses, and I just think I'm really seeing all of us wake up in a way that's quite beautiful in this moment. So when we think of the store clerks and the Amazon workers that went on strike, another friend was telling me that her niece works in the emergency ward of a hospital, and the hospital just cut their salaries. So here we are interconnected with this whole network of people. Listen to these verses. If to serve myself I harm another, I'll suffer later. If for others' sake I harm myself, every excellence will be my heritage. So this is in some ways referring to Tonglen. If I'm keeping comfort for myself, I am harming others. If for others' sake, I take on the suffering for others or let go a little bit of my comfort or resources, every excellent is coming to me. My character is enhanced. My bodhicitta is enhanced. My path is enhanced. Enslaving others, forcing them to serve me, I will come to know the state of servitude. But if I labor for the good of others, mastery and leadership will come to me. Enslaving others, forcing them to serve me, I will come to know the state of servitude. But if I labor for the good of others, mastery and leadership will come to me. Thus, the suffering of everyone should be dispelled, and here there is no debate. To free myself from pain means freeing all. Contrariwise, I suffer with the pain of others. I'm going to repeat this and then we'll sit with it a minute. Thus, the suffering of everyone should be dispelled, and here there's no debate. To free myself from pain means freeing all. Contrariwise, I suffer with the pain of others. It's just extraordinary that we're having a national conversation about our interconnection right now. The nurses in the emergency ward, the store clerks, the Amazon workers. We see that to free ourselves from suffering, we have to acknowledge our interdependence. We have to acknowledge our sameness. And we have, through that sameness and interconnection, a greater compassion to the suffering that we see in our relationships now, which are much wider because we see them more clearly. Okay, in the next series of verses, Shanti Deva goes a little bit deeper to see exactly when and how does this sense of I begin, and how can we just look at the root of that. So when we talk about self, we're talking about a permanent, unitary, independent self. So permanent means not subject to birth or death, unchanging. So logically, we know that we are going to die. Logically, we know that we were older than we were before. But the unquestioning way we live our lives is still like that movie where the character goes through lots of changes, but the perceiver is unchanging. And we have this mythical, unchanging perceiver self that we feel is just moving right along, traveling as the star. Unitary means it has no parts. And that has to do with the time sequence of later there's an older person and earlier there was a baby. And independent means a self that would be separate from our body, separate from our thoughts. So we don't usually investigate why we can behave as though we're in this starring role in our own movie. But when we investigate it, it's because we haven't questioned it. We haven't questioned the unchanging perceiver. We haven't questioned that being that inhabits our body. So Shantideva says, okay, let's take it back to the beginning. If there was a permanent, unchanging self, an I, a me and a mine, when would that have begun? When did that arise for the first time? And from the perspective of emptiness, we could say there is that subtle I that has traveled from lifetime to lifetime, this feeling that there's an I. And we talked a little bit about the very subtle I last week that is not at any level of our consciousness, but affects how we see and behave. And then there's an acquired I that has to do with our lived experiences, our philosophies, our cultural programming. So if we think in the West, I think, therefore I am. We have a programming that because we're thinking, we are. that there is an I and it's connected to our thoughts, not separate from our thoughts. So Shanti Deva goes, okay, if we follow that all the way back, finally we have to get to the sperm and the egg. And the sperm and the egg were not you. They were your parents, right? So there was a sperm and an egg that were clearly coming from different entities. And let me read you the verse. And in the Tibetan philosophy, that refers to blood, but that means the mother or the egg. Although the drop and blood is alien and in itself devoid of an entity, yet because of strong habituation, I recognize it and claim it as my I. So from the beginning of being embodied, we know that it came from that first barrier we have between self and other, which would be our parents. But we see that emerging baby as a self and grasp it through habituation as I. If we look back, we can't isolate the separation from the sperm and the egg, the separation from the parents, the separation from the grandparents when we try to find our beginning. But when we look at it, we see that even though we can't isolate a moment in terms of a particular microsecond, I don't know what is the slowest name for time at the moment, but they keep finding tinier and tinier parts of time. We can't find the tiniest part of time when there was an I that was different from our parents. Still, we absolutely have a solid, like concrete belief in the I of this self, right? So let's just think about that for a minute. How firmly we believe there is an I, even though we know that originated from our parents and therefore it would have originated from their parents. This me-ness. And it's the habituation that this is an I that became the Kenmo in this case, the Jinni that I see. So if this is all it takes, the grasping it and claiming it, and then making a habit, every time we look in the mirror, we see ourself appearing over and over and over again. Why then not identify another's body, calling it my I, and vice versa? Why should that be hard? To think of this my body as another's or their body as mine. Mothers understand this. Mothers who gave birth have an immediate experience of it was my body, now it's another's body. How is it so easy in that case and then so difficult to make relatedness, sameness with all the other beings we're encountering in life? Hands and other limbs are thought of as the members of a body. Shall we not consider others likewise limbs and members of a living whole? Let's switch the vocabulary. Sons, daughters, parents are thought of as members of a living family. Shall we not consider others likewise limbs and members of a living whole? Just as I defend myself from all unpleasant happenings, however small, likewise I shall act for others' sake to guard and shield them with compassion. And then he concludes this beautiful series with all the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. As long as there are beings to be found, may I continue likewise to remain, to drive away the sorrows of the world. So let's go back into the Tonglen and keep in mind this beautiful presentation of a logical analysis as to our relatedness, our interconnection with all beings. And let's go right in a very simple way to visualizing the person you've kept in mind, the person you don't know well, but to whom you're seeing a connection in your life and to whom we see right at this moment we're totally dependent upon: the UPS driver, the store clerk, the trash collector. And in the simple form of Tonglen, just breathing in whatever is difficult for them in this moment and breathing out the resources, the comfort, the health, the warmth, the good food, however you want to do it, but breathing in and welcoming what is difficult or suffering in another, and breathing out and giving away all those things that you have been protecting and guarding, your comfort in however way you see it. And again, it's not so much literal or solving a problem. It's opening your heart, seeing the sameness of joy and suffering, and arousing the compassion with an immediacy that you're like Tara jumping off your cushion to wish to help or benefit. So I want to conclude with another vignette from His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche's life that I like a lot, and I often contemplate. So he was in Tibet, and some villager was intoxicated and had a pistol and was angry and started chasing his car saying, "I want to kill you, I want to kill you." And so the attendant said, "Drive faster, drive faster." But Garchen Rinpoche said, "Stop the car, stop the car." And he opened the door and welcomed that poor person. And I'm not saying this in any way to say we should be in unsafe situations, but I like this story because there's a sense of what life could be like if our reactivity was with Tonglen, not with anger or fear. And so we could open the door and say, "Beloved," as though we would to a small, confused child, and say, "Honey, what's troubling you? How can I help you?" So that sense of fearless compassion that we've been investigating, that understanding of our sameness and our interconnection with all of life, really is um, to begin to hold that state of mind that is welcoming with the sense of beloved to every encounter that we have, or in every encounter that we have. So I'm going to conclude with that story and a dedication, and then we can talk for a minute. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.